All right, I'm Jordan Heidi. I am an exposure response prevention specialist, and I am the subject of this case study.
So, Jordan, the first question is, what misconceptions do people have about OCD?
The primary misconceptions that people tend to have about OCD include the idea in which they conflate OCD with neuroticism, a tendency towards orderliness, meticulousness. That is not a clinical definition or clinical diagnosis of OCD. OCD is defined by intrusive thoughts that are persistent, relentless, disturbing, and sufferers perform compulsions to assuage the anxiety that's wrought by those obsessions. Another thing that often people don't understand about OCD or don't tend to incorporate into their schema of OCD is just that compulsions are not pleasurable. So that's one thing that separates an OCD sufferer from a neurotypical counterpart who likes to organize their books. The neurotypical counterpart enjoys the organization, and they're not doing the act to relieve anxiety wrought by an intrusive thought. Sufferers feel an absolute need to perform a compulsion. Compulsions are often not pleasurable. And there's a component of diminished voluntary control over the ability to perform compulsions or ultimately resist the urge to perform compulsions.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, so you've done a lot of treatment to treat your OCD, and I'm curious that at this point in your recovery journey, how has treatment impacted your ability to engage in interpersonal relationships?
It's definitely benefited my ability to do that. I have a lot of social anxiety as a byproduct of intrusive thoughts and a fear of negative judgment or evaluation, in a lot of different domains, particularly when I started out with treatment. I also have body dysmorphic disorder, and I've really gained leaps and strides in that treatment. At first I couldn't leave the house without, full makeup, dress, false eyelashes, jewelry, the whole 9 yards. Now I've gotten to a point where I can accept the uncertainty that somebody may have a negative evaluation about me and not have the potential of that negative evaluation affect how I dress or groom myself or anything like that. So that's a pretty clear link. Treatment for OCD is all about accepting uncertainty. So, being able to be in social situations and accept the possibility that somebody has a negative evaluation or criticism in mind that they maybe are not sharing with me is no longer nearly as anxiety provoking as it once was.
Thank you for that. The last question I wanted to ask was, what advice would you give to clinicians who are seeking to treat individuals that are neurotypical, specifically with OCD?
The number one thing to know right off the bat is that exposure and response prevention is the gold standard treatment for OCD, and it is extremely, extremely rare to gain any sort of progress in your treatment if it is not exposure and response prevention. A lot of times I'll say that if you can define OCD in 3 words, it's intolerance of uncertainty. And so a lot of times what we're trying to do is expose people to that uncertainty. The content that comes up in these intrusive thoughts, the feared outcome feels incredibly real, even if it's highly unlikely. So even if it's a 0.0001% possibility that might occur, to an OCD sufferer, it feels 95% probable. And that's where compulsions come from, is the urge to control the uncontrollable or to avoid negative outcomes. So as a clinician, The implementation of exposure and response prevention is absolutely essential. And I would also advise people who are treating OCD to be mindful of any instances in which they're offering reassurance to the client, because that is just worsening their OCD. So ERP and no reassurance, and that puts you on a pretty good road to effectively treating a client with OCD.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.